in her rejection of many of the conclusions that you.
Details are not immediately clear. This is what we know ahead of President Trump's address.
Canada has officially cut ties with the US after President Trump imposed global tariffs, calling it Liberation Day for the American economy. Trump believes tariffs will protect US jobs and reduce reliance on imports. Critics argue the policy harms both the US and the global economy. Ontario Premier Doug Ford called it Termination Day for US-Canada relations. He warned that tariffs would raise prices on food, cars, and medicine. Trump calls it liberation, but he's liberating people from their bank accounts, Ford said. The stock market reacted immediately, with the Dow Jones falling over 1,000 points. Analysts warned that these policies could lead to a US recession and a global economic crisis. Barron's magazine stated that the pain from the stock market is just beginning. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney declared the US-Canada partnership over. He criticized Washington's unstable policies and announced Canada would no longer engage in political games. The Canadian government is preparing retaliatory measures. Canada is seeking new trade partners. Carney has traveled to France and the UK to strengthen ties. Canada is now looking to build stronger relationships with Europe and Asia. Ontario announced a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the US. Canada supplies 20% of US crude oil and 9 billion cubic meters of LNG. Ottawa warned that more tariffs would result in power cuts to the US. Canada also revoked tax incentives for US electric vehicles, especially Tesla. This could lead to higher car prices and a parts shortage in Detroit. Canada threatened tariffs on canola, wheat, meat, and dairy. This could cause food prices in US supermarkets to rise sharply. Tensions between the US and Canada are escalating. Will Washington back down, or is this the start of a prolonged confrontation? Carney quickly initiated negotiations with European and Asian countries, seeking alternative markets to the US. Preliminary agreements were made with France and the UK regarding energy and automotive supply chains, opening opportunities for Canada to move beyond the shadow of the US. When asked by EU media if Canada was moving away from the US, Carney answered, "We will need to dramatically reduce our reliance on the United States. We will need to pivot our trade relationships elsewhere." This was a strong message. Canada was restructuring its economic strategy. From energy and automobiles to agriculture, Canada used powerful economic strikes to challenge Trump's tariff war. Prime Minister Carney and the Canadian government showed no hesitation in implementing retaliatory measures, aiming to build an independent strategy. The question remained, how would Washington respond? Could Canada form strong trade alliances with Europe and Asia to reduce its reliance on the US? Trump's tariffs, such as 250% on Canadian dairy and 50% on steel and aluminum, threatened to disrupt the economic order of both nations. The tariff sent Canada's economy into turmoil, but Canada was not ready to just endure. Ontario Premier Doug Ford responded aggressively, declaring that Ontario would cut power supplies to the US if tensions continued. Ontario provides about 25% of the energy to US states, and cutting off this supply could create significant difficulties for US businesses and households. Ontario also cancelled a $100 million contract with Elon Musk's Starlink. This decision demonstrated that Canada would sacrifice economic benefits to protect its interests. Ford emphasized that Ontario could use minerals, like nickel, as a strategic tool to pressure the US. Nickel is vital to the US automotive and technology industries, and limiting exports could force the US to the negotiating table. Japan, meanwhile, took its own step in retaliation. Japan sold off large amounts of US Treasury bonds, a move that could shake the US economy. The US had imposed tariffs on Japanese electric vehicles, EVs, affecting Japanese automakers like Toyota and Honda. Japan retaliated financially, signaling that if the US continued its protectionist policies, Japan would reduce its support of the US economy. The bigger question was whether Japan's actions marked the beginning of a shift away from US economic dominance. Other countries, including China, South Korea, and Russia, had already begun to diversify their foreign assets. Japan might follow suit, strengthening regional cooperation and reducing dependence on the US dollar. This shift could lead to a global financial realignment. As the economic landscape shifted, the US faced tough decisions. Should it compromise with Japan, reducing EV tariffs, or continue the confrontation with financial and trade risks. The global economy stood at a critical juncture. What would the US do next?